computers, but as they went through the program, they kept going back to what the researchers were trying to do. Is take that flat image and expand it so you saw a whole head, face, hair, everything. Well, the program tells of the many difficulties and discoveries that were made along the way. They found out that although the cloth was soiled and worn, damaged by burn marks from catching fire at some point in its history, this latest team concluded that the bloodstains are without doubt human bloodstains. Not bloodstains from an animal or from anything else, from a dye, but human bloodstains. And they concluded that the marks on the cloth agree with what the four Gospels say about Jesus' wounds on his head, hands, feet, side, and body, wounds from the crown of thorns, the nails, the spear, and from being scourged, both on the front and back of his body. Their conclusion? The image was definitely not painted on the cloth, or somehow impressed on the material by some means. Where the image is distorted or hazy, they attributed it to how the cloth would naturally drape over the curves and the contours of the human body. While the present-day researchers concluded that they cannot tell how the visible trace of the image on the cloth came to be, they don't know how it got there. And they raised the question, could the image have been left imprinted on the cloth at the very moment of the resurrection? Finally, unable to say whether or not the shroud is actually the burial cloth wrapped around Jesus' body, these researchers concluded that the shroud and how the image came to be remain a mystery. But the definite, although faint image of a man's face on the cloth remains. And they told us that just before the 20th century, in 1898, I believe, a photographer was permitted to take a photograph of the shroud for the first time. And he was completely surprised, if not shocked, by what he saw. The negative that he developed shows a clearer and a more defined image of a man's face than he ever expected. And that, of course, is the image, if you're familiar with it, that has been printed and published and passed around. As the program kept asking, usually just before a commercial break, could this be the face of Jesus Christ? And it did help you there. You made sure you stayed and watched it when it came back on. Well, when I turned the program off, I concluded that it was a good story to hear, it was a good story to watch. Its telling was interesting, it was propelling, it was challenging. But as I turned off the TV, I thought, if all the tests and the studies were able to conclude the shroud is the one that did wrap around the body of Jesus as he lay in the tomb, then you and I would have tangible proof that Jesus lived. And a lot of people question that he was crucified, and folks still question that he died and was buried. But then the question of the resurrection is certainly answered. We're going back to our gospel. Matthew, the gospel writer, tells us the story of resurrection morning. On the edge of dawn, the two Marys start out for the tomb. Imagine their emotions all mixed at the time. Unsure what they would find, probably convinced that the tomb would be closed, and if they managed to get into it, the body of Jesus would still be there. But all the sorrow, all the lack of joy, all their mixed up feelings was with them. And Matthew tells us in the story that suddenly there was a great earthquake. And the tomb was opened by a shining angel who rolled the stone away, and that this angel so frightened the guards posted on watch to the point that they couldn't even move or take action. They became, like Matthew says, like dead men. And the angel says to the women, don't be afraid. I know you're looking for Jesus, but he's not here. He's risen. Look for yourselves, he tells them. And then go quickly and tell his disciples that he is alive. Well, as if the earth shaking, the stone rolled away and the angel weren't enough, the two Marys run into Jesus himself. and he greets them. And they fall onto the ground in heartfelt thanksgiving that he is alive, that they see him, and they take a hold of his feet, the very feet that they knew were hard and tangible. And Matthew tells us they worship him. Then, as the story goes on, they hear his strong and so familiar voice say, "Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Well, Matthew's story is a good one. And Matthew's story helps us as Easter morn to do what any story always does. It helps us to make connection with what it's talking about, what it tells us, to make connection with the point that it's making. It helps us make the connection that the resurrection of Jesus is of timely, and, as the earthquake surely attests to, is of cosmic importance. Matthew's good story helps us make the connection that the resurrection of Jesus is of great and of lasting importance for each of us in this building this morning. Jesus' resurrection does shake the very foundations of the world, as Matthew says. And more. Jesus' resurrection shakes the very foundations we human beings accept, even though we're not sure about them at times. Those foundations that we tend to build our lives on. It shakes the foundation of all our thinking, of all our conclusions about how things are put together, and of course, the resurrection story of Jesus shakes all of our expectations. Matthew's story makes the point that to believe in Jesus is to believe something about Jesus. You can believe, you can accept that there was a Jesus. We don't know how tall, how fat, exactly what the color of his hair and eyes were, but a lot of folks can accept there was a Jesus. A lot of folks can accept that, yes, he existed, he was crucified, and he died. But Matthew's story helps us make that connection, that to believe in Jesus is to believe in something about Jesus. Or to believe in Jesus is to believe that he is more than a good and a caring individual. And we certainly need a lot of those in the world. And that he was much more than a teacher of morals and good behavior. That he was far more than an exemplary mentor. And we hear a lot about mentoring today, or a good model to follow. To believe in Jesus is to believe that he is the Son of God, as the Scriptures say, and that he is the Savior of the world. But even more again, the story makes the point that to believe in Jesus is to believe and to experience deep down that he is our personal Savior also. To know that we, our lives, our world and our times, do matter immensely to God. To know that God does truly care about your future and mine, and what will happen to this world of ours in the future. Well, you know, for some Christians, to believe and experience personally that Jesus is their Savior may stem from one or two or more perhaps ecstatic moments when, like the two Marys, they run into Jesus and unmistakably know who he is. And then again, for many other Christians, many of us in this building this morning, knowing that the risen Jesus is our personal Savior, is a reality that quietly grows and matures and blossoms over the years of faithful listening to the gospel, years of listening for that sweet voice of Jesus, even as